Right, here we go, trying to video my Desert Island discs in response to Steve Coxon's magnificent effort videoing his. I think he took 17 minutes. I'm hoping to be done a bit quicker than that. Whether this will ever reach the YouTube channel, I don't know. Anyway, my Desert Island discs don't represent my favourite songs by any means. In fact, some of them are not even chosen for by myself. Just things that I remember from parts of my life long ago, really. So I need to apologise first of all for choosing an enormous number of straight white old men, which I guess is fairly reflective of the fact that I'm a straight white old man. It's not that I don't listen to any females. I love Kate Bush, Joni Mitchell, and more recently Laura Marling. To mention just a few. The Pretenders got a lead singer that's a female, and so on and so forth. And it's not that I don't like soul, reggae, or any of the other genres of black music, jazz. It's just that these are the songs that really stick in my mind from, I suppose, parts of my life that are significant. Anyway, the first song is a song by someone called Steve, and I don't know if it's ID or Edie, and it's called Stay Here and Love You. It came out in 1961, and really I'm including it because I can remember my mum singing it to me, or singing along with it, I guess, really, rather than singing it to me. In my memory, it's only me, but actually I realised that during the course of that year, quite early on in that year, my brother was born. So I think I'm doing some kind of awful Freudian thing of writing my brother out of my past history so that I can have the love of my mother all to myself. In truth, I really didn't get on too badly with him until we were teenagers, and now we got on with each other really quite well in our later life. It's a cheesy pop song. My mum used to sing it along, and strangely, I just find myself singing bits of it even now, more than 50, 60 years later after it came out. The second song I've got is the Beatles. Actually, anyone my generation grew up loving the Beatles, and anyone who knows anything about the Beatles will know that at some stage in your life, when you're my age, you go from the red greatest hits album being your favourite to the blue greatest hits album being your favourite. And actually, the blue greatest hits album's been my favourite for quite some time. But I'm going to choose a song off of the red greatest hits album, She Loves You, which came out about 1965, I think. We were pretty poor, I must admit. We'd moved house by then. The first house where Mum used to sing me the first song was a council house in Sheppel Way in Stevenage, and we moved to a much bigger council house in Gonville Crescent in Stevenage, and it felt like a real step up, but we still didn't have any money. And then one day my dad came back with what I can only describe really as a knockoff EP rather than a single, which had the song She Loves You, and Doris Day singing Secret Love. Of course, it wasn't actually the Beatles or Doris Day singing either of those two songs. It was some poor hard up session musicians and singers making a few pounds on the side. It's interesting because we actually, most of that time from there onwards, right the way through to the 70s, we used to buy things called Top of the Pops albums, which were albums of current hits sung by session musicians, really, and played by session musicians. Of course, a number of those, Elton John being an example, went on to become quite famous musicians in their own right. So the quality wasn't that bad. It's just that they weren't the real things. So the Beatles' She Loves You, or She Loves You, I suppose it's called, is going to be my second track because of that seriously bad knockoff EP that my dad brought home. Moving on, really, from the mid-60s to the early 70s, and I was really trying very hard to think of a song that really reminded me of those early 70s. A number come to mind. I can remember Nilsson being number one with Without You, and I can remember all sorts of really awful songs like Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep. But the one that I think reminds me most, particularly of the Summers, it came out in 1970, but I think it was hanging around for summers for most of the 70s. But for the early 70s, the summers, which always seemed much hotter and longer and what have you, I fall into all the cliches of an old man, was Mungo Jerry's In the Summertime. Again, not really a song that I'm particularly fond of. But one is that is really synonymous with being young in the early 70s in the summer. We used to camp out in our back garden in an old tent that my grandparents had moved on to a better one. They went on camping holidays quite frequently. And ourselves and all the neighbourhood kids used to spend the nights in our back gardens and listening to the Radio Luxembourg mainly, I guess. And this song just seems to sort of always have been on the radio during that time. So my memories of the 1970s, early 1970s, when I was about 11 or 12, really are very, very much along the lines of that kind of music. Or the other one I always think of is Free to Pain with Band of Gold, which reminds me of Saturday mornings failing spectacularly to attract the attention of any girls in the Mecca in Stevenage. From there onwards, really, I suppose I can start now talking about songs that I liked. I chose to buy or chose to listen to myself. And the first one, Steve won't be at all surprised to know, is a Bob Dylan song. It's not my favourite Bob Dylan song. It's not the best Bob Dylan song by any means, I wouldn't have thought. But it's Hurricane from the album Desire. Now, around the time that came out, which I'm guessing 75, 76, I bought my first Bob Dylan album. I had a few pennies left over from something, birthday money or something like that, and decided to buy an album. And I'd heard a little bit about Desire, bought Desire, took it home and played it, and to quote someone else from the old Grey Whistle test there, started a lifelong love affair with Bob Dylan and the band indirectly as well. Hurricane was my first of many Bob Dylan albums, and it reminds me really, or Bob Dylan songs, and it reminds me really of that feeling of being certain about something. Reuben Carter was a middleweight boxer accused of a triple murder. Bob Dylan took it upon himself. He didn't write all the lyrics; it was a co-written thing to proclaim his innocence. And I believed it. I believed he was innocent. I was fired up and aghast at the racism and the unfairness and all of the usual things you do when you're 17, 18 years old. About a year ago, I listened to all 13 podcast episodes of Hurricane Tapes, which was an in-depth expose of the whole case and the failings of it. And in the end, just like the guy that made the Hurricane Tapes as a podcast, I couldn't tell you whether Reuben Carter committed a triple murder or not. I suspect not on balance, but I really don't know. And I think I've lost something really, that I can be that reasonable and listen carefully to too many different arguments and fail to make my mind up properly. I was better as an 18-year-old in many ways because I believed stuff and I passionately wanted things to be as I thought they were. Anyway, any Desert Island Disc has to have a song for your wife, partner, whatever. Now, it's quite easy for me to do this without too much trouble because I've been married for 38 years this year. And I've known Alison for over 40 years. Now, she hates sloppy songs. I quite like them. I mean, I've got lots of songs that I listen to and get all emotional about Alison on, but I would never tell her. I'd never play them for her. So we kind of agreed. Well, it must have been in the mid to late 80s because that's when the song came out. We kind of agreed that our song for us as a couple would be One Vision by by Queen. Now that really isn't a very romantic song at all. We saw it as a kind of call to arms for our vision of a better life, what we were aiming at, bringing our kids up in the way that we thought we would, looking for the type of government that we wanted to have and the kind of life we wanted to lead. And although not romantic, at least it is some kind of manifesto to live your life by. And it's a good song. We both like Queen. I'm not saying that they were the band that really changed my life, but they were a good band, and we enjoyed a lot of Queen songs, and we listened to their greatest hits, and we have a long respect and love of poor old Freddie Mercury. Kind of lived his life the way he wanted to, and you can't really knock that too much. Anyway, by the time we'd chosen that as our song, and by that time we'd had two children, Flora and Sam, and they were getting to be sort of a bit more grown up and a bit more discerning in what they wanted to do. But I do remember still that they would sing along to one song. I mean, I think Flora's always been a bit more amenable about liking the music that we liked more than Sam. He wanted to go his own way a bit more. But up until a point, they would always sing along to Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer in the car. We had the album So. We love Peter Gabriel. Quite like Genesis as well, really. But we had the album So in the car, and Sledgehammer was obviously the single from that album, or the first single from that album, and it was a bit of a sing-along. And I can still think of driving along, normally to go and see my mum or Alison's mum and dad in the car, driving along, singing along to Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel. Again, it's not really my favourite Peter Gabriel song. I can think of a lot more that I like better, but it's just that memory of everyone joining in with the chorus particularly. Shine On You Crazy Diamond is a funny song because it's an older song than where I've got it chronologically in my life. It's from Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd, and that whole album really, Wish You Were Here, is about remembering and memorialising, in their case, Syd Barrett. I didn't really get that album until probably maybe even the early 90s rather than the late 80s. Obviously, it came out about 1975. I already had The Wall. I'd been and seen the concert of The Wall at Earl's Court, which was an amazing sort of experience. And my favourite Pink Floyd album probably is Dark Side of the Moon, which I got in the sort of mid to early 70s. But I did get Wish You Were Here later on, and Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which is 26 minutes long, Steve, you'll be pleased to hear that I'm sticking to my usual thing of choosing songs that are enormously long, is a song that reminds me really of, well, two things. At one time, when we didn't have the kids to sort of babysit, they were old enough to look after themselves, we started going around my friend Di's house and having Indian takeaways and what have you, and a nice sort of boozy evening listening to music and chatting. And one of the albums he had was Wish You Were Here, and I used to play that quite frequently and listen to Shine On You Crazy Diamond. It's also reminds me of people that I've known who've died, really. It's just a song that provokes memories. It's not lyrically brilliant. It doesn't really make very much sense altogether, really, I don't think. But musically, it's beautiful, and I really wouldn't want to be on a desert island without Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Now, I'm now right down to tune number 7, and I've only literally got one more left. And I ought to say at this stage, I feel terrible because I'm a massive fan of a load of people that I've not got any music of at all. Neil Young, Elton John. Anyone who knew me when I was a schoolboy would say that you're bound to have Elton John. Simon and Garfunkel, as I say, Joni Mitchell, Kate Bush, and the band. I really love those. I can't believe I haven't got The Weight in my 8 discs. And also Stevie Wonder and B.B. King. I love blues guitar, Eric Clapton, and all of those, really. And I haven't got any of them. And the reason I didn't use my last slot up on all of those, any of those, is that I've really felt that I needed to have some classical music. I'm not really a massive classical music fan, but I do listen to classical music. And Alison and I always felt quite strongly that one of the massive benefits of being brought up in the 60s and 70s in state schools was that they made a massive effort to try and educate us in slightly, middle class things, but classical music would be a case in point. And to which my grandfather, my mum's dad, loved classical music, particularly Elgar, and I kind of picked up on that. Elgar, Ralph Vaughan Williams. I like Mozart, I like Beethoven, and I'm nothing technically very brilliant classically, but I do enjoy listening to classical music. And the bit that I've chosen is Elgar. It would have to be Elgar, really. That's by far away my favourite classical composer. And in the end, having gone through all sort of the obvious ones, Pomp and Circumstance, Nimrod, stuff like that, I've come to the cello concerto, the Elgar cello concerto, and particularly the one played by Jacqueline Dupre, who tragically died in her 40s with multiple sclerosis. Made, I think, the recording that I'm going to find when she was about 20, and started the cello when she was about 5. So she is a genius, Elgar's a genius. It's a beautiful piece of classical music, and I felt I had to have some classical music to listen to on a desert island. Now that just leaves me really with the book. You always get Shakespeare, which is fair enough, and the Bible, which is again fair enough. There's something to read, aren't they? But the book I would choose to take, I think, would be the Oxford collection of English verse. I can't remember the exact title, but it's the great big work by the Oxford University Press of poems through the centuries. I'm a chemistry teacher, or I was a chemistry teacher. I've got a degree in science, but I was always interested in poetry. I had a bit of a go at writing it once, but to disastrous effect. And I do enjoy reading poetry, and I find that on the desert island I could even read it out loud and not embarrass myself by doing that. So that would be that. And my luxury, well, I kind of get this feeling that I could learn to play a musical instrument if I just had enough time and space to do so. So ideally, my luxury would be a piano. That's a bit unreasonable, isn't it? But a piano with some kind of learn to play yourself manual. Short of that, a guitar and a Burt Weedon book would probably suffice. Anyway, I've managed to almost talk as long as you did, Steve, so I'm really quite proud of myself. Hope you enjoyed it. See you soon.